Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to my channel. We are going to continue with our Unreal Engine 5 series, and in this video we are going to explore materials. We'll learn how to create a material, how to use material graph, and how to apply textures to our materials in our Unreal Engine 5 scene. So we've got a lot to cover. Let's get started. So in the previous session, we actually created this UE5 lessons. What I can do is to create a new folder here, or to double click on the icon, and that takes me to our project browser. You can create a folder for this session via this browser as well. Here we are. I'm going to go to Film, Blank, and let's create a folder, new folder. And it's going to be material. I'm going to select that folder, and for the project name I'm just going to call this lesson 2 underscore materials. Simple as that. We want content browser to stay on. We get some goodies with that. We get a lot of textures, materials, props. We may or may not want to use it, but I still would like to have it. And we don't need ray tracing. With that, I'm going to go ahead and go create. Here we are inside Unreal Engine. Now, hopefully you all have watched the previous video where I talked about the user interface, world outliner, content drawer, how to drag and drop objects, navigations, so on and so forth. So we are not going to cover that, but what we have in the scene is just basically a simple static mesh, floor mesh. So let's put something on this scene using the starter content that we have. I'm going to go straight into props and have a look at what we have. Probably this matte preview is a good starting point. I can kind of click on that, and I'm going to press E to rotate it in Z-axis so we get that beautiful golden looking U. Pressing F on it, and we have the scene. Of course, at any point of time where you feel like you reached a level, you can always go ahead and save your current level. Project file is out of date, not a problem, just go ahead and update it. From this point onward, we are going to just focus on how to create materials. I can select these lights and press G on it, so we hide them for time being from our viewport, not from the scene, just the viewport. And let's go to drawer content, and let's put together some folders. We would like to always stay organized, and we would like to have our own folder. So I'm just going to go ahead, right click, new folder, call this lesson 02 underscore materials, and you can double click on that. And I would like to create two folders in here. One folder is to hold the actual material, another folder is to hold textures. We want to get the terminology right. And if you look at the starter content, we actually have the same hierarchy. We've got textures and materials. So basically all I need to do is just to go in here, rename what I have to materials. We will be having more than one material, and I'm going to rename this to textures. Well, it's already set to textures. We have more than one texture. And again, if you would like to get the lingo right, you always can come here and have a look. For example, there is a folder for shapes, there is a folder for particles, there is a folder for your levels, there's a folder for all the blueprints. So you can kind of mimic that and sort of understand why we do what we do. All right, we have these two folders. Let's go ahead and create two materials. I would like to have one material for the ground level, and I would like to have one material for this sphere to begin with, static preview mesh that we have. So let's go ahead and create those. To do that, it's really easy. You go to the folder that you want to save the materials, and you just right click and you go material. Now this material doesn't have any specification, it just comes with its default values and attributes, but we will get to that really shortly. First things first, we would like to name it. I'm going to call this floor underscore mat, which indicates that this is a material for the floor, so I can just simply drag and drop it onto the floor. We don't see much of a change because obviously this material is also a default material. And I'm going to go in here and right click and create another material, and I'm going to name this one mat preview underscore capital mat, which indicates that I'm about to apply this material to this mat preview object in the scene. That's the name of the object, and I'm just going to drag and drop it, and we get that nice checkerboard. Now, what should we do with these two guys? How are we going to edit them? We have the material, but there is no attribute associated with those materials. So that's actually very, very easy. Let's go to the next chapter and see how we can use material editor or material graph to our advantage. Now, once your materials have been assigned and ready to go, we can go ahead and edit them. Well, how to edit them? Simply by double-clicking on them. As soon as you double-click on the material, you will be getting the material graph as a floating window. One way is to just go back and forth between background and foreground. Another way is to just dock that as a tab. So I'm just going to left mouse button, drag that right next to my main window. And there I have my material tab. Now be mindful of the fact that this material tab only linked to this material. So each material gets its own tab, as opposed to some common 3D software packages when you have one common shared environment for all the materials. You get a material graph per material. What does this mean? That I can double click on this material, mat preview, and basically have this as my second tab. So this window to work on the floor, and this window to work on the mat preview. Let's actually start with mat preview and explore this node right here. First things first, let's have a look around this window and see what is available to us. How to navigate in this window? Simply hold right click and move your mouse. That's how you move. To zoom, scroller, it's going to basically zoom in and out, in and out. Same rule applies here. Scroller to zoom in and out in your preview page where you change your material and see the update in this window. And of course, if you select any of these nodes, the attributes will indicate what you need to change with regards to the selected node. That's not the only node. We have plenty of nodes to choose from. As a matter of fact, just to show you how big this window can be, I can go to Palette and show you all the nodes available to us, all the nodes that we can access and bring into this scene. And you can see how long this list is, but don't let this overwhelm you or intimidate you, because we're starting with just a beginner level. We are not going to use too many of these guys. And another way of accessing these nodes is by right clicking. So if you right click, if you know the node, you can actually type it in. Another way to do it is just to press tab and you bring the same node. The good thing about that is actually brings the categories. For example, if I want to access the vectors, I don't need to go through this long list to look for vectors. I can just press tab and scroll all the way down and I get to vectors. And that's going to kind of short list what I need for me. Now let's go through these guys and see what each mean. So base color is basically your base color weight, the color that you would like to assign to this object. Then we have metallic, and that carries all the metalness values. You may assign 0 to 1 to turn a completely rough object into a metallic object, or you can assign a black and white map to this metallic value. And at any point of time, I can hover my mouse, left mouse button, and drag, and you can see I get a wire, and that wire can get connected to another wire, and that's how you actually assign an attribute to this material node. Then we have specularity or specular, which is in charge of the amount of specularity or highlights or reflections that you're getting on this model. It can be as a form of a float value, 0 to 1, 0 non-specular, completely rough, and 1 completely glossy. But you can also give this attribute also a black and white map. Now, the way that specular works is opposite to roughness, how rough the surface is going to be, and based on that you get a much rougher value or glossier surface. So 0 on this is going to be no roughness, it's going to be 100% glossy, the surface. And if you set the value of roughness to 1, you get a completely rough surface, and not much specularity can be seen. Chances are you're going to use one or another, not both of them. Anisotropy specifies how stretchy your specular highlights are going to be. And you would see that in kind of brass metal surface or compact disc, where the specular highlights are usually stretched along the surface, and you would like to create those type of effects. You can specify a value, or you can just use a map to have an impact on only a region of your model, which I'm going to admit is not that common. And then you get emissive color, where you would like one part of your model to have self-illumination, or the entire model. And with that, you're just gonna plug a color to this channel, or even map in conjunction with the color, and you get self-illumination and somehow a glowy sort of color appearing on the surface. The rest of these channels are auxiliary channels. The one that we do use the most is going to be normal. This channel expects a normal map. It's an RGB texture that you provide to the application, and you can create normal maps in variety of techniques using variety of software packages. We're not going to talk about that, but that's probably the most common one that you will be using, at least at the entry level of adding materials and texturing within Unreal Engine 5. Now, with that said, let's talk about constant expressions and how we can use them to our benefit to assign values to metallic, specular, or roughness, and at some level add colors to our base color or even emission value. Now, if you start with Unreal Engine 5 material graph, probably constant would be one of the first 5 nodes that you need to know. There are 2 ways of getting the constant node into the scene. One way is to right click on it and just type in constant, and you get constant. Another way is to go into palette and type in constant. Now, you immediately notice that we have not 1, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 constant nodes. We've got a normal constant node and a 2 vector, 3 vector, 4 vector, and constant double. We are not going to talk about constant double, but we do talk about some of these guys because they're actually quite important. And you can see we've got shortcut assigned to each one of them. Right now, let's start with just a normal constant value, or constant expression rather. So I'm just going to bring constant, click on it, and the shortcut for it is number 1. If I hold down number 1 key on my keyboard and left mouse button click, I can just click and create constant nodes. What is a normal constant node? Let me just select them and delete them, bring this guy into the position, snap it and get it close to this preview matte node, because I'm about to actually connect this guy to some of these attributes. Let's talk about what a constant node is. So this constant expression node is just a simple single float value. That float value can go from minus infinity to plus infinity, and the default for it is 0. What does this mean? It means that you can actually apply this expression to any input and change the nature of this attribute. Now we know what normal constant does, let's go and explore other constant values, because to begin with, I actually would like to give this ball a color before I apply specular roughness, so on and so forth. So the next constant is called constant 2vector. And the shortcut for it is 2 on the keyboard. So if I hold down 2 and click, I can get this constant node. Now, this constant expression has got not only channel R, which is just a simple float node, but it has got also channel G. So if I click on it and look at the details window, you can see you've got R and G. But to get the proper color range, we need R, G, and B. And the channel B is missing, so probably this is not the best pick if you want to channel that or plug that to your base color. So this output provides 2 channels vector values for us with 2 constant numbers. You may say, Reza, if channel B is missing, why we're even using this? What's the use? Well, it's actually very useful to use constant 2vector to modify texture coordinates, simply because texture coordinates are usually green, yellow, and red. Again, useful, but not when you want to apply that to your base color. So we are going to remove that. The next one on the list is constant 3 vectors. And the shortcut for it is 3 on the keyboard. So I'm just going to hold 3 on the keyboard. You can click on this as well, but just to practice those shortcuts, 3 on the keyboard, click, and we get 3 channels, R, G, and B. If I extend constant, you can see now we are getting the full range. So constant 3 vector expression outputs 3 channel vector values. Basically, there are 3 constant numbers, R, G, and B. Now we can connect this to our base color. So I'm just gonna click left mouse button, drag and drop into base, and we're not getting any result because the color is still black. I'm gonna double click and increase the brightness. And now it's time to use this color wheel to pick a color. Let's say I'm going to make this blue, and I'm going to go OK. Now, every time you make a change, every time you add a node, you need to press apply to apply the changes. So far, what we see is just a preview of what's going on. If I go to my main, we still don't have the material. I need to just press apply so the texture gets compiled, or the shader gets compiled through the material graph, and only then if I go to main I get the result. I believe my matte floor shader is missing, so there you go, reassign it again. So that's how you apply material using a normal constant 3 vector. You may be wondering what constant 4 vector does, and constant 4 vector is actually quite useful. I can press 4 and click, and that uses alpha channel to its advantage. So what basically you can do, you can have one channel goes to base color, another channel goes to opacity, and create see-through objects. We are not going to talk about that at this stage, but I'll make sure to put together a tutorial and talk about more intermediate to advanced material video. So with that, I can actually double click on it and change the color to whatever I want. I can darken the color if I want, right? And make the color richer, make it more vibrant, and of course apply and see the result. Now that's where you can actually use this constant float expression. Now you can say that, all right, I want to change the value of my roughness. So all of a sudden I get 0 roughness. Look how shiny the object is. And you can use the same node and say, well, I don't want to get roughness really, I want to get specular. The way that you break this, you right click on the channel and you go break link to material expression constant. Of course, another way to do that is to hold down Alt and click and you break the link. Now let's say I want to take that to specular, which does the opposite. And now you can see 0 doesn't make the object glossy, it makes the object rough. That's why these two are kind of working against each other, and you better to pick one. I tend to use roughness a lot. I don't use specularity as much because of the workflow that I'm using. So Alt click and I go from roughness to the constant node or the other way around. And all of a sudden, if I go and apply, my sphere gets very reflective. Now, same rule applies when you want to add metalness. So I can hold down 1 and click, and we get a value. You go ahead and assign the value. And right now, metalness is set to 0. I can set metalness to 1, and all of a sudden, we're getting a super metallic conductive object or material. I can go apply, switching back, and here's my metal chrome ball. So you can see how simple that is to apply nodes to your model. You can even combine and mix and match if you wish. So let's go to the next chapter and see how we can use Lerp node to our advantage to basically mix to the base color that we already have. All right, let's say I'm going to bring another constant, pressing 3, left click, and I'm going to give this one a completely different color. I just want to get that contrast really. I can just close the stats window. We really don't need it. I'm going to go to content drawer and I'm going to go to texture, and I'm ready to bring in my very first texture. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go import to lesson 2. I will be using desktop lesson 2, and I've got a folder called texture, and I'm going to bring my own logo. It can be anything that you can bring. Just browse and just find a black and white map. That works as your mask if you want to combine 2 textures, 2 maps, what have you. Now, the way to combine the two, one way of doing it is to apply a multiply and then channel the multiply to your add node and bring it to your base node. That's how we used to do that in older versions, but now we have a Lerp node. If I press tab, if you type in interpolate, we have linear interpolate. And that's a very useful node because that allows you to have channel A, to have channel B, and to have a black and white alpha channel to mask between the two. So I can go and press Alt, click, and I can probably deactivate metalness as well and say, well, channel A goes to blue, channel B goes to red, and now I can just drag and drop my textures in there and this is going to be my alpha. So I'm just going to bring this one here, which is a texture sample, and I'm going to say, all right, this goes to alpha. Every time you bring an image, you're bringing a texture sample. You can even press tab and call texture sample to the scene, and from here actually go ahead and bring in whatever texture you have in mind. Now usually Unreal is going to relink the last texture that you used, but you can actually browse through your library and pick any texture that you want and use it, just so you know. Now this is ready to go. I'm going to go and connect that to my base color, and look what we have. If I just change the shape of our preview mesh, you can see now the black portion is getting the color from color A, and all the remaining white portions they're getting color from color B. So that's how you actually combine two nodes with the help of your Lerp node or linear interpolate node to be able to achieve a slightly more complex result. Now let's go to the next chapter and see how we can bring in and assign textures to my base map and to my specular or roughness, and make use of normal as well to get a more pleasing result. So let's go to the next chapter. I'm going to unplug these guys and see you in the next one. Now we have few materials. We've got floor and we've got matte preview. It's time to bring some textures so I can plug them in here. Again, if you would like to follow along, feel free to use textures from this folder under starter content. I'll be using some of my own textures, so I'm going to bring in a few textures. So wood planks for the floor, and I'm going to bring another set for my matte preview guy. So everything is ready to go. I can actually go ahead and clean up this scene a little bit. I may or may not use these guys, but I would rather have a clean slate so we know what we're doing. Now, again, keep that in mind. You don't want to bring everything into the scene. Each material graph is linked to a particular material. So right now I'm in matte preview material, and that's why it's important to name your materials, because then you're not going to get confused what window or tab belongs to what material. So with that, let's bring in the materials I have for my matte preview. Now you can double click on these guys to see them. This is reflection. I can go in there. By the way, you can always dock this into the layout, so you don't need to press Control Spacebar every single time. I personally don't mind. This is the color version, and this is ambient occlusion, and this is my normal map. Now, one very important thing that you need to be mindful of is color space. What color space you're using. So with base color, you would like to get sRGB and make sure that sRGB is enabled. However, if you have normals, you need to make sure that sRGB is unticked. And again, Unreal Engine is smart enough to realize that that is a normal map, right? So I'm just going to bring in a normal map, and you can see that Unreal Engine under details specify this map as normal. Whereas if I bring this color map, Unreal Engine says, well, your sampler type is color. And if I double click on the map in here, sRGB is ticked. However, it's not that straightforward for all of them. For example, I've got, let's say, reflection, which is my roughness map. If I'm just going to delete this right now. If I double click on this, you can see sRGB is on. It needs to be off, because with data maps such as opacity map, metallic map, roughness map, you need to make sure to set this to linear color space, not RGB color space. So I need to make sure that this is off, and then I need to save, and only then I'm going to press Control Space Bar and bring my roughness map. And now it says that, all right, your sampler type is set to linear, which is a correct sampler type. So be very careful on that and try not to make mistakes, because inaccurate color space is going to change the nature of the material. Your material either looks odd or it just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. We have another one, which is ambient occlusion. We are going to do the same thing for ambient occlusion, and we are going to save, and I'm going to bring that data map in as well, because, well, if we can use ambient occlusion, then why not? So let's plug them in and see how we can benefit from these maps. Well, it's actually very straightforward. After this, RGB goes to base color. And if I go ahead and apply and go to main, we should be able to see the result, and it shows the result beautifully. I can go to and plug my roughness map, and of course I'm going to apply, and it applies roughness only to certain part of the material, so it's not going to be as intense. I will be having ambient occlusion, which is quite useful. Plug and drag and drop, and that ambient occlusion is going to kind of intensify some of the shadowing effect that I would like to get, adds more depth to what I have. So you can see I'm getting more AO to my scene, which looks fantastic. And of course, normal, which I can just drag and drop, apply normal map, and that plays a massive role in terms of getting a realistic looking result. I'm going to press apply and go in there, and you can see right off the bat we're getting a really good result. Now the tiling needs to be changed, and I will talk about that, not to worry, but for now we're moving forward as planned. At any point of time, if you feel like nope, this doesn't do it for me, I really don't like what I'm looking at, well, you know what to do. Number one, and left click, bring a constant, and let's say, all right, I really don't want to get that level of shininess. I can just add a value and make the whole result a lot rougher. So you can do mix and match and get a slightly different result. Now with that done, let's go ahead and do the same thing for our floor. So I'm going to go to Content Browser, and this time I'm going to bring the wood material and drag and drop into the base, and I'm going to go apply to the main. We have the wood grain nicely presented. I'm going to go to the content drawer and make sure that my reflection map doesn't have sRGB, it is linear, so saved, and bring it to the scene, drag and drop it to the scene. So I'm going to go to matte preview, bring it to the scene, and plug it to roughness, RGB to roughness. And of course we have with blanks normal map, which I can bring and just apply to my normals. And that immediately really adds realism to what we have in the scene. So if I zoom in, you can see I'm getting a really nice looking result. That's perfect. Let's go to the next chapter. And in the next chapter, we are going to talk about how to deal with tiling, because obviously tiling is off for actually both models. I might actually select this and rotate it ever so slightly in 90 degrees. So the wood grains are going actually this way. That's much better. Let's go to the next chapter and talk about tiling. Now, to do tiling, you really need to target the UVs of all of these nodes. So we have in every texture sampler, we have UVs that we need to be mindful of. If you don't use texture sampler, then you're off the hook. But if you're using texture sampler, you need to make sure that if you assign a coordinate to your UVs, you assign it to all the texture samplers in one go. Otherwise, you will run into some discrepancies. Now, let's just dive right in and see how we can tile our material. That's actually fairly straightforward. You just click and then you type in coordinate. And the first node or expression that comes up is texture coordinate. Now, texture coordinate expression outputs UV texture coordinate in the form of a 2-channel vector. And that's why we're using this in conjunction with constant 2 vectors, because they both have 2 channels. Now, this by itself is not going to do anything. I need to have a normal constant as well. So I'm just going to hold down 1 and click and say, all right, this, although we have tiling U and tiling V, I still need to specify their value, how much or how often the texture needs to be tiled. How to connect the two? You can just use a simple multiply node. So I'm just going to use a simple multiply node. In the case of the Lerp node, we really don't use the alpha. So just a simple multiply node can do the trick for us. And the output goes to this UV, and it goes to this UV, and the output goes to this UV. So make sure whatever you do, you apply to all of the texture sample nodes. Now everything gets controlled by the help of this value, and this value is set to 0, meaning that no tiling whatsoever. I can set that to 0.2, and all of a sudden we're getting fewer tiles than the default of 1. So if I press apply and go to the main, we're getting a much bigger pattern, and that's how you tile your patterns. Admittedly, this looks a lot better. I can even go to 0.15, and this will get applied to all 3 nodes. I can go apply and go to main, and this definitely looks much better. At any point of time, if you would like to save your graphs, and I highly recommend you to do so, you go ahead and save them. And that saves your material, that saves this graph. So make sure to do that. By the way, in order not to redo the whole thing, you can always press Ctrl C, go in here and press Ctrl V to copy and paste them. So you don't need to kind of redo the tiling nodes. That goes in here, that goes in here, and that goes in here, of course. So you get fewer tiles. I'm going to go apply, and let's see how it looks. That looks much better. So that's basically in a nutshell how you apply materials to your model, how you create them, how you assign textures to them at any point of time. You can go to your material. Let's say you would like to create a brand new material. You go material, call this emissive, and let's say I'm just going to drag and drop it onto this, and you can just go in there, double click on this, create a constant. So holding down 3, let's say I would like to just make these guys metallic, hold down 1, go in here and go to metallic and set this one to 1, and then I click and create another one to specular and set this one to 0, apply and create a base color for it and go apply, and you can see how quickly we're kind of back to normal. So very, very intuitive, very easy to use, and I personally love this workflow and the way that you work with these individual windows is very intuitive. At any point of time, if you wish to change any of these materials, let's say I want to change this texture to any of these textures that I have in the material outliner, you can do that. Of course, you need to do that respectively with your roughness map and with your normal map, but it's actually very, very simple. All right, last stop, let's go to the next chapter and see how we can create glass and transmissive material inside Unreal Engine 5. We did talk about materials, and if I just double click, you can see everything is right in front of us. However, I'm not sure if you noticed, opacity has been turned off and refraction has been turned off, and it doesn't matter what we do, we can actually go in here and connect. It's still not activating. So to do that, we need to make two changes, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next chapter. Okay, let's start by making a material. Right click, go to material. Obviously, we're going to call this material glass. Drag and drop into our matte preview, and let's double click, go to the material graph and tab it right next to our main scene. Now let's bring the material and observe we indeed do not have opacity right now, and we do not have refraction. Now the reason that this is happening is because Unreal by default thinks any material you create is opaque until we say otherwise. So how to change the nature of this material from opaque to transparent? By going to its details. Right underneath the material rollout, we have blend mode, opaque to translucent, and the first step is done. Why the first step? Because Unreal says, okay, this is a glassy object. You probably don't need metallic, you don't need specular, you don't need roughness, so on and so forth. But the reality of the matter is we do. And the problem that we have at the moment is because none of these attributes are visible, our light cannot react to this object. And that's why we need to have the second change. I'm going to scroll down. Under lighting mode, I'm going to pick surface, translucency, volume. Now this material can react just like a glass because we're getting opacity, we're getting base color, all the attributes that we want. So speaking of which, let's plug in some of the constants that we already know and make a beautiful glass out of it. First things first, I need a constant 3 vector, holding down 3, click, and let's plug this to a base color. By the way, if you wish to tint your glass, that's how you do it. At the moment, we just want to plug in a white color. Holding down 1, I need a single channel float, which is a normal constant, goes into metallic. It's going to be fully metal. We need the same node, holding down 1, click to get another single float expression going into our roughness, and we don't need to have any roughness. If you think your glass has got a degree of roughness in it, then by all means feel free to do that. And then we get to opacity using the same expression, holding down 1, click, and it's up to you how much opacity you would like to give to this model. Opacity of 0 makes this glass invisible, so we need something. Let's go with actually 0.5. Let's meet halfway there. I'm going to go apply, and then let's go to the main scene. Let it compile. There we have it. By the way, we are going to address this compiling issue. Then you always need to have to wait for a few seconds for the material to compile and for it to pop up. We are going to address that in the next video, but for now we have opacity working for us. There's only one problem, and probably you already guessed it. It looks like a see-through plastic. It does not have refraction. That's why every time you hook in opacity, you need to do something about refraction. Well, let's use another single channel float to our advantage and drag and drop it to our refraction, and refraction helps the light to react to the surface and to bend and scatter. Now, how much refraction we're gonna give to this glass comes down to what material you would like to simulate. And this is something that you need to do a little bit of research on. So table of refraction, index of refraction, you can actually search on the internet and see what value is close to a value that you want. For example, if you would like to simulate air, the index of refraction is 1. So basically we're getting the same result. If I go apply and go to the main menu, let it compile, you can see there is no refraction. Refraction is set to 1, which by default means that no refraction. And then you can just bring it closer to what you need. For example, water is 1.33. And if I go ahead and apply, we can see now we're getting a little bit of refraction. I love that. That's where you go and tweak a few of these attributes. Let's say, for example, you would like to tweak roughness a little bit. You introduce a little bit of roughness. Make the whole glass a bit frosty or foggy. You go apply, let it compile, and you can see we are getting a little bit of that. Beautiful. You can just go ahead and increase your index of refraction. For example, oil has got 1.46 and introduces more refraction. Let it compile, and you can see now we're getting even more refraction introducing to the scene, and that goes all the way. You can just increase that, get diamond, get silicon, which I think has got an index of refraction of 3.5, which is very, very high. But it comes down to what material you would like to simulate, and based on that you are going to apply refraction value. So that's how you tweak index of refraction, as simple as that. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. Now, the compiling scenario we need to address, because every time I make a change I need to apply, and every time I need to wait for a few seconds, and based on your computer specs you may need to wait more or less, but we are going to address that through material instancing. In the next video is going to be a very useful session, but for now that was a really quick overview on how to apply materials, how to create materials, and how to apply textures, what color space you need to be mindful of, so on and so forth. Again, I hope you found this video useful. Thank you very much for supporting this channel, and I can't wait to share more of these topics with you. Next week is going to be again on material. We are going to go over this compiling issue and how to parameterize our materials. Until then, stay safe and see you guys soon.